Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer Al Cole, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and I've helped pave the way to treating women, guys too, with the dignity that they deserve, and I do that through my show, People of Distinction. Aired on very dignified radio networks, including the biggest, airing CBS shows. And that's Apple's iTunes radio network. Under their professional news talk division, they air CBS shows, Fox News, NPR, BBC, C-SPAN. The whole kit and caboodle, best talk in the country around the world on Apple's iTunes radio network. And visit my website, peopleofdistinction.org. And you can check out my Apple streams through my station page, as well as a lot of my associations with people like Ariana Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post. My major media consulting, I've helped hundreds of people to become entrepreneurial at what they do, moving their books or speaking programs or coaching programs, whatever. Podcasting, all of that stuff. I can help people if they're going to try to make a living through media. Well, I can certainly help out. And you can email me at alcoholic@gmail.com. You heard me right. That's ALCOLEHOLIC@gmail.com. And I really want to thank my CBS radio listeners for coming up with that handle. Alcoholic. Seems like from day one, my listeners have been saying, Al, we love what you're doing there, brother. In fact, we're hooked on it. We're alcoholics. And I'm also a New York Times best-selling author with Chicken Soup for the Soul. Chicken Soup for the Soul is distributed by CBS's Simon & Schuster. So we keep it in the family that way. Coming up, an interesting guy whose message I know you're going to be really taken by. His name is Jim Commodore, and this is his message with his book. His book is called Rational Innocence. Now, what does that mean? A lot of my listeners are asking that question right now. Gee, I like the sound of that, Al, but what is rational innocence? Some people even think, oh, well, come on, that's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. No, I don't think it is. And I'm going to explain it my way, and then Jim is going to come on and keep you gripped with his explanations of his book, Rational Innocence. I've written many books myself. In fact, I talk about innocence in terms of my thought patterns. Innocence begins when you're a baby. All right. Now, some people will say, well, gee, babies don't know anything. I think babies know love better than human beings when they start to grow up a little bit. Imagine yourself, that baby, when you're first born, and that's the biggest thing we have in common. We're all born babies. And that baby looks around when he's first born or she's first born and says, wow, I'm here. I made it. I'm actually alive. Looking around with love-colored glasses and saying, come on, life, give me more of this. I love the adventure, the thrill of being alive at all. That's the greatest gift of all, just to be alive. And that baby realizes that and is so happy and grateful, big word. And as that gratitude is growing, that innocence of love is taking over. And if we had a societal system or systems that nurtured that beautiful love and innocence of that baby, I think we'd be okay as a human family. That is rational, people. Now get it. What is more rational than to love? Some people might say, well, that's soppy stuff. Well, yeah, if they've been burnt on love, if they've been burnt on the emotion of love. But see, the innocence of love is much more than just the emotion. That is the energy of love. You're energized universally by that beautiful love unit within you, within that heart and soul, from whence you came. Whoever or whatever you think that is, God, or maybe the universe, or the overmind, or that guiding light force, or whatever, that is innocence. And that is so rational, because that is what makes us a human family. That is what makes us human. That is what makes the universe and composes the beautiful space-time continuum in which we live. And that is the only reality, ultimately, that is rational innocence. Now, Jim's going to say it his way as well. But now that I said it my way and I got you gripped, people, hey, I want you to stick around to listen to Jim and talk about how he can help you out with his book, Rational Innocence. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, so it's easy to get. And he was brought to us by a wonderful publishing company, self-publishing company. Brings me a lot of guests to People of Distinction with Al Cole, and that's Parchment Global Publishing. If you got a book that you want to move it with Parchment. ParchmentGlobalPublishing.com. Welcome, Jim, to People of Distinction with Al Cole. It's a pleasure to have you on today. How are you, Jim?
I'm just fine. Thank you.
Okay, so I gave it a shot here as to what rational innocence might look like, might be like, the purview here, and I want you to fill it in your way. You wrote the book, and boy, I tell you, that's a big title, even though it's just 2 words, Rational Innocence. It says a whole bunch. What did you mean when you wrote that book, Rational Innocence? What did you mean by rational innocence, Jim?
Well, innocence is not just a baby. Innocence is a lack of experience. Innocence is coming into new situations that you have no idea what is going to happen. And there's 2 ways of approaching the situation. One is emotional. The other is rational. So Rational Innocence is a book that looks at the rational side of approaching new and different experiences in one's life.
Okay, so let's fill it out a little bit. Tell us a little bit more in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, the real grist of your book. Your book is probably at least 100 pages, 100 pages long, maybe 150, maybe 200. So leaf through the book for us and tell us some of the ways that you describe it in your book.
Well, if I remember right, it's about 268 pages. At any rate, the main character, John Castano, is a man who is a lawyer. He is probably in his mid-30s. He is unmarried. He works for a Minneapolis law firm. A friend of his and a client dies in an accidental tree falling in a cabin in northern Minnesota. He's called in by his friend's widow to finalize the estate up at the cabin where he had his accident. And John Castano realizes that this is really not an accident. So he pursues the approach that something sinister happened here, and he hires a detective.
Is that it?
Well, I don't want to give away too much about the book.
What is the rational innocence about so far, the storyline?
The innocence is he's never been involved in a murder. The rational part is he tries to figure out just exactly what happened here.
Okay.
And he's involved with his friend's widow, who eventually becomes a love interest in the book. Mm-hmm. And it involves espionage. It involves additional situations that require a totally different perspective on how he's going to handle it. And it becomes very complicated for him.
Yeah. So, if for listeners to want to buy that book right now, what would you say if you had to sell it? And you do, to my listeners, what would you say is really the main selling point of your book, Rational Innocence, for people to want to buy it right now?
Well, it involves a lot of twists and turns. in a lot of different situations and a lot of hard to understand circumstances, which culminate in the very end of him becoming true to his belief that this was a murder.
Uh-huh. Now, murder is appealing in our society, not necessarily on a personal level where we want to go out and kill people, but on a theatric level and an entertainment level. Murder mysteries, we're drawn to that. And we're drawn to, TV shows like Columbo. Boy, that guy can solve a murder better than anybody else. When you wrote the book, Rational Innocence, and, about murder and things like that, were you thinking, wow, this is a great way to sell books? Or did you have an experience that way? Not necessarily you as a murderer, but were you out there, maybe as a detective, maybe in the streets and seeing how things go, and you say, yeah, I've got another twist on a murder mystery. Tell us, some of the background here of what made you want to write a book about murder and about rational innocence to begin with.
Well, first of all, let me explain. I've been a salesman all my life. I retired in 2007. Never had a chance to read much of fiction and literature because I was pretty much tied up with technical stuff. So I began reading, and I've read probably 300 to 400 books since my retirement. One day I just said to myself, I can write as well as these guys. So I started writing, and I had no plan. I had a beginning and an end, and I wrote the book, and I reworked the book, and I reworked the book, and I reworked the book until I got it just like I liked it. Mm-hmm. But I never planned on publishing it. It wasn't my purpose to publish the book. It was my purpose to give it to my grandchildren. And I had encouragement from friends and family who had read the manuscripts. And so I decided, well, let's see what happens. So I submitted it to the publisher, and that's where we're at.
Now, what sells books is promotion. It's not really a storyline. It's not really how well a book is written, because people don't know how well it's written until they buy it. And in order for them
Correct.
to buy it, they have to be gripped by something to buy it. So we've asked, I've asked you that. What's going to grip the audience here? As a salesperson, you're used to selling things. I've already asked you, how would you go about selling your book to my listening audience? Let me ask it a different way. In terms of selling you to the audience, a lot of books are sold not as books, but the author. And wow, boy, this author really intrigues us. Now, before the show, you asked me, well, is this going to be an interview on the book or on the author, Al? I said, well, it could be both. You've told us a little bit about the author, and that is you, Jim Commodore. A little bit about your sales background, you're retired now, and all of that stuff. What makes you different, Jim? What makes you an expositor of rational innocence in your own life, where my listeners can say, wow, that Jim is really something. I love listening to him talk, and what a great background he has. Tell us a little bit about Jim Commodore and what makes him so great.
78 years of experience. We have traveled the world. We have experienced things that most people never experience. We have grandchildren that are just beginning their lives. And what makes this book great is something that tries to tell the grandchildren just what's in the experience and the brain of Jim Commodore.
Well, now you're talking a little bit here, because Now you're talking about we. I'm assuming you mean you and your wife.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Now you
My
bring
wife.
another person, and we know, Jim, that behind every great man is an even greater woman. And so now we can really talk about greatness with two becoming one. As I was saying earlier in the introduction, that's really the root of being rational and the beautiful innocence of love, too. Tell us a little bit about how you and your wife, with the children that you've raised and now the grandchildren that you have, at least one wonderful experience in your life that can grip our audience right now to sell us on Jim Commodore. What's one of those experiences with you and your wife?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. I mean, there's so many of them. And, my wife is an international consultant in education. And we've traveled the world working with international schools, or she was working with international schools. I was just goofing off. Anyway, she has been the thorn in my side and the inspiration in my life. Mm-hmm. So that's the experience. We have two wonderful granddaughters and two wonderful grandsons. I have two daughters, and they are well along in their years. Not to express my own age, but they are well along in their age. But the whole experience of writing a book when you're 77 years old is exciting to me. And I get into the book, I live the book, I write the book as if I was the person.
Well, there you go. Now we can do something with that. Hey, people, we got a guy named Jim Commodore on my show right now who is a person of distinction. And not just because he's written a book. One of the reasons is because he wrote a book at the age of 77. Now, how many of you have a book inside of you that will never come out? He gave it a try later in life, and it's never too late. It ain't over till it's over, people, and even then it ain't. And Jim knows that. That's one of the messages of Jim Commodore. Keep going, people. You've got the time. You could be 60, 70, 80, and you still have the time to create greatness. And another thing is his marriage to a wonderful woman who he learned a lot about. He's a guy that's not afraid to sometimes step back and give some of the glory to another human being. And that is his wife. And because he did that, they have a marriage that's lasted for many, many years, throughout many children, and now many grandchildren. Imagine that. Now, that's a legacy right there, people. And if that ain't enough, the guy is an ex-salesman, too, and a crack salesman. So he knows how to put it together that way. All of these things, and he's a world traveler. How many of you have seen the world? Hey, the way that Jim has. All of these things, and I know now it's making sense to you, why you should order this book, Rational Innocence, by Jim Commodore, the guy with all of those wonderful qualities. Order it at Amazon, order it at Apple, and you can order it at Barnes & Noble, your choice. And he was brought to us by a great publishing company, Parchment Global Publishing, and you can order up your books that way, too. Go to parchmentglobalpublishing.com. Thank you so much, Jim, for this spotlight interview about the greatness of Jim Commodore and Mrs. Jim Commodore, too, and your book, Rational Innocence. We congratulate you on your wonderful life experiences and achievements. Keep it up into your 90s. And you can always come back to People of Distinction when you write that second book as well. Thank you so much, Jim.
Well, thank you. And the marriage is 52 years.
Wow, look at that.